Saddam Hussein and his sons that worked.
Well, here's why. With regard to bin Laden, he is basically an accused terrorist and war criminal responsible for 9/11. After 2003, 2004, when Gaddafi in effect came in from the cold, he gave up his chemical weapons and his nuclear program, rudimentary as it was. He paid $10 million, as I understand it, to each of the families of the victims of Lockerbie. The Secretary of State, Condi Rice, visited Libya. In other words, he was, but he was no longer an enemy of this country. And so I don't think he has done anything to this nation, to us. It would justify us putting a bounty on his murder or assassinate him, and we will give you money. I don't think we ought to do that as a practice. And quite frankly, we are not at war with Libya. That's why we ought not to attack Libya. And unless and until he attacks my country, I don't think you do things like that.
So before I take another caller, there is an uncomfortable irony in the fact that many of these regimes falling are those so staunchly backed by the US for so long. And I wonder what you think that will do for the reputation of the US in the region.
Well, the reason we backed it on war, they were friends and allies in the war on terror. We did not put the regimes in power. You have to deal in this world with the cards you are dealt. I mean, the Saudi monarchy was in existence long before George W. Bush and Barack Obama arrived, and they have been a good friend in a lot of ways in OPEC and in the war on terror, and a lot of people disagree about OPEC. But the point is, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to foment revolutions against every autocratic country or regime in the world? I mean, half the regimes in the United Nations are non-democratic. And we got to deal with those regimes, but I don't think that means the United States is responsible for putting them in power or responsible for their policies. Now, the president's got a very tough situation because very often American interests conflict with American ideals in this world. I was with the Reagan in the Cold War. We preferred Pinochet to Allende. I mean, when I was with Nixon. And the reason we did is that Allende was moving toward Cuba in the Cold War, which was the war in which we were engaged, whereas General Pinochet, even though he seized power, was an ally in that war. And I think you got to answer for what you do, but there are reasons why you do it. But I don't think it's fair to blame the United States simply because we deal with regimes that are in power across the Arab world and the Islamic world. How many democracies are there over there? Should we not deal with all those countries if they're not democratic?
Well, let's get a call in from Curtis in Virginia, because I know the phones are ringing hot today. So go ahead, Curtis.
Well, just to piggyback, Riz, on what you were saying earlier and what Pat was alluding to, our support in the Middle East, it kind of mirrors, it's kind of the sense of hypocrisy that's there. It's kind of like the Soviet Union saying they supported solidarity in Poland, or they supported the revolution in Czechoslovakia. We put these individuals, they're in our satellites. We put these people in power. We support them militarily. We support them financially. They come train in the United States. They're top generals. And then we say, oh, well, you know, when it doesn't come against us, maybe we shouldn't support these people. So what would Pat say about that?
Yeah, I think you're getting at the fact that these weren't put into power by the U.S.
No, and let me say this. I disagree with the administration. George W. Bush called for elections in Egypt, elections in Lebanon, and elections in the West Bank and Gaza. When Hamas won that election in the West Bank and Gaza, I argued that we ought to not cut relations with them. We ought to recognize them as long as they maintained a truce with Israel, because they had won a democratic election. We might not like who won, but I think we should have been consistent with our principles. The same with Hezbollah. Look, I was in China with Richard Nixon, writing toasts to Mao Zedong, who 20 years earlier was torturing American prisoners of war. Now, these Hezbollah and Hamas are not friends of the United States, but the United States, you've got to talk to people that dislike you and people who have been your enemies if you're going to work something out. And so, but again, we didn't elect them. The people elected them. We didn't put the king of Saudi Arabia into power, the king of Bahrain, but we do have our Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf. in Bahrain. So you've got to deal with these folks, and very often, like the King of Bahrain, they are friends of the United States. They may be flawed leaders, but they are friends of the United States.
And you're saying, sir, that whatever happens, that the U.S. should support democracy, irrespective of who
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe. Do I believe we ought to urge crowds to go into the streets of Riyadh? No.
I meant in the sense that if there is democratic...
If we've pushed elections, and the winner of the elections, and they've been free and fair, I think even if they're unfriendly to the United States, I say we will deal with you correctly and cordially if you will deal with us the same way. And as long as you don't damage American interests, that we're not responsible for who elected you, you know, but we will deal with you because we're a great country, large country, and we got relations all over the world. It's a lot of our founding fathers said, you know, look, that just be just friends and brave enemies.
So another call here. Dwayne's on the line from Virginia. Dwayne, thanks for being with us. What's your question, please?
Yes, Mr. Buchanan, I have the utmost respect for you. I was wondering why Obama is dragging his feet on the situation in Libya, Egypt, so forth, when the European community, the EU, you know, France, and the Gulf.
Okay. So, Dwayne, it's a question of why is the U.S. out of step with its allies? Is that the case, Mr. Buchanan?
I think there's no doubt the Allies were ahead of us. Certainly, if you take the Turks, they told Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, President Erdogan, the Prime Minister, excuse me, he told Mubarak, get out after 1 week. He said the country doesn't want you. The problem is the United States has a relationship with the Egyptian military. Mubarak, whatever he had done there, had been a friend to the United States. He had maintained the peace deal with the Israelis. You had the Saudis and the Israelis and the others pressuring the president, saying, don't undercut him. You'll undercut all of your allies and friends. He was in a very tough situation because it was clear he was no longer, if he probably had at the beginning, a considerable amount of popularity. He no longer did. So was President Obama late on this? I think so. But if you talk to our other friends in the Arab world, they say, what did you undercut your friend for? Well, so this is the world we live in.
I think, as you've written, it's better the devil we know.
Sometimes it's better the devil we know than the devil we don't know. We found that out in Iran. We found that out in Nicaragua. Somoza is gone. I don't like to use the term, but that's what FDR said. He may be a son of a, but he's our son of a.
Let's get an email in here, sir, that came in from Uganda. All right. And Muhammad Ali Yusuf from Kampala wrote in saying, the US might be waiting to intervene in Libya and harvest its oil just as it did with Iraq. I mean, it's hard to escape that spectre of oil politics. A lot of people think it's about just the oil, don't they?
They do, but I think you'll find among the American people today a real reluctance to go into Libya. There's not that we only get 1% of our oil from Libya. Second, we didn't go into, I don't believe even Bush went into Iraq for the oil. I think Bush was converted to neoconservatism. This fellow had tried to kill his father. He felt his father had failed by not finishing him off. He had the neocons saying this is the proper approach. We'll surround Iran north, south, east, west with the ships out there. It was mainly geostrategic, I think. And the idea that, quite frankly, that the Americans